Hi everyone, Andy Wolverton here. And last night we had a wonderful discussion of the film Chinatown from 1974. I wanted to make that video available to you, or at least most of it. I did forget a few minutes into the program that I should have been recording. So you missed a little bit of my introduction, which I'm going to give you in just a moment. But most of the rest of the discussion did make it to the video. I'm trying this for the first time, so I hope you enjoy it. If you enjoy Chinatown, I think you will benefit from this discussion. Not because of what I said, but because of so many great comments by so many people who love this film. I also want to say that I owe a great deal of thanks to my co-host, Darnice Jasper, who moderates the discussion and does a fantastic job. So, I introduced Chinatown this way, with two quotes. You may think you know what you're dealing with, but you don't. And most people never face the fact that in the right time, in the right place, they're capable of anything. Appropriate words from Noah Cross to J.J. Gittes. We'll have much more to say about both of these men in a moment, but first, some background on tonight's film. Screenwriter Robert Towne once said that Chinatown is a state of mind, not just a place in Los Angeles, but a condition almost indistinguishable from blindness. Towne had a policeman friend who said, "I work vice in Chinatown doing nothing. That's what they tell us to do, nothing. We can't get inside that culture. We can't tell if something is going on, whether we're helping somebody commit a crime or prevent one. It's like dreaming you're in paradise and waking up in the dark." For Private Eye J.J. Gittes, Chinatown has come to mean any place where you're on unfamiliar ground, a case, a country, any location where you can be taken in by appearances. Chinatown stands for the futility of good intentions. Now, to fully understand and appreciate the film, we have to know something about its director, Roman Polanski. Now, understand that I am in no way condoning Polanski's personal life. He fled the U.S. in 1978, facing charges of unlawful sex with a minor, and has never returned to this country. But before that happened, he survived the Holocaust in his native Poland, while his parents were taken in Nazi raids. After his first film, Knife in the Water, was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, he made a few more movies before he was asked to come to America to direct Rosemary's Baby, which was a huge hit. The next year, his pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate, and 4 of his friends were brutally murdered by the followers of Charles Manson. As we probably all know, this took place in Los Angeles, the same setting as Chinatown. When Polanski got the job of directing Chinatown, he wasn't the same person he had been previously. After the tragedies he experienced during World War II and the brutal murder of his wife, Polanski's life was changed forever. He became obsessed with immense loss and a fatalistic worldview that does not allow for happy endings. Chinatown's future was not so immediately happy either. Although the film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, it won its only Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for Robert Towne. Chinatown really signifies the end of an era in multiple ways. Sharon Tate's murder marked the close of the glory days of Hollywood the Community, and the movie made by her grieving husband represented the last gasp of Hollywood the Business, run by artists and their allies. Big business and the bottom line of money, which have always been prime factors, took over. The studios were about to change, though, with blockbusters like Jaws right around the corner. It would become harder and harder for a major studio to make a film like Chinatown in the future. The tragedy is that no one recognized it at the time, and we are still dealing with this. There's so much to say about this film, but let's start with this. Chinatown is often called a neo-noir, but perhaps it's more accurately a true film noir, even though it's set in the late 1930s, predating the classic noir era. In many ways, it feels like a classic noir, but the film, especially its ending, would never have passed the restrictions of the production code. And we're going to talk now about what everyone at the discussion last night thought about Chinatown. So thanks for watching the video, and I hope you'll consider joining us for one of our online discussions. Thanks again.
Into a fictional plot. So yeah, to me, it's all of the above. It's just a wonderful film that it's just I try to revisit often because it's so enjoyable.
Great. Okay, Jim, then Jan, then Gary, and Bill.
To me, it was an impression about how much of a noir picture it was. All the elements of noir were there, except it wasn't in black and white. But there was they had all the violent things that were happening, but then also the action between the male and female, where first of all, they had a double entendre just before they had their mutual seduction, where he said, "This hasn't happened to me for a long time," and so you knew what was going to happen. And then after they had sex, he said he still called her by Mrs. Mulray, and then he slapped her on the face, all the thing, and the dame secretary. So it was super noirish.
Yeah. Many of those aspects you named, Jim, we would see frequently in classic film noir. Really, really good. Okay, yeah. Darnie, who's next?
Jan.
Everybody, I saw this film first run in July of 1974. It had me about 3 seconds into the movie when the Paramount logo moves across the screen. You see the clouds, and suddenly you hear music. But Jerry Goldsmith's score pulled me into this movie immediately. I can't emphasize how much it pulled me in. Then it was a matter of absolutely being amazed at the mystery of all mysteries for me. The characters, everything else. It was the collaboration of everybody behind the scenes, every single person, all of the actors, down to the bit parts. It's an absolute thing of beauty that even with the tragic ending, I can't tell you how many times I have seen this because I go back to experience it again. And one of the big things to me is it's the writing. It's always the writing. Polanski had the screenplay where he wanted it when he was ready to direct. Polanski Town, and then this mystery person named Edward Taylor, who was never revealed until The Big Goodbye, created a story where even a throwaway line, like when Geddes is talking to the phony Ida Sessions, and she calls him up. This is right after he's had his nose slit, and she's trying to have a conversation, and she says, "Are you alone?" And he simply tosses off the line, "Isn't everyone?" I can't tell you the effect that had on me when I saw it, and it has stayed with me for 47 wonderful years.
Jan, thank you so much for sharing that. I knew going into this, Jan is a huge fan of this film. You touched on many things that we want to touch on a little bit later, particularly the Jerry Goldsmith score, which is not the first score that was written for this film, which we'll get to in just a moment. Darnie, who's next?
Yep, Gary's next, and then Bill B.
I think for me, the two things that stand out are mood and pacing. And it has a very, not leisurely, but it's not a rushed pace. And certainly, you watch it and you're well aware that movies today would have many more cuts and jumps and all of that. I just loved the pace that it took throughout the movie. And it also sustains a mood throughout the entire movie of tension, of mystery, of who can you trust, the sort of danger of the landscape and all of that. And to sustain both of those, from start to finish of a 2 hour plus long movie is just incredible. And for me, I think that's where the movie sort of magic comes from, the sort of coming together of those qualities.
Thank you,
Totally
Gary.
agree. Thank you.
Bill B, then Jackie.
Yeah, I want to echo all of the sentiments of everything that's happened before
And
me.
John, I see you.
I am so glad you picked this movie.
And Bill.
One of my all-time favorites. It's just a masterpiece pretty much on every level. It's taught in screenwriting classes all across the country, is often cited as, if not the greatest screenplay ever. It's right up there with The Godfather and Casablanca and some other real classics. There's so many things about it that strike you and that are so worthy of discussion. I've really been looking forward to this week because we always have such rich discussions, and we've got a good group, and there's always insights. And this is a movie that is so full, it's so rich. One of the things that struck me about it was the fact that it starts off as a general noir mystery with, of course, wonderful political underpinnings, but then it gets into that really dark underbelly and the whole thing about the familial crisis that's going on, and that's sort of almost out of the blue. And the fact that I was reading some things that really made a lot of sense. Town is a wonderful writer, particularly of dialogue, but he always had, well, not always, but he would, if he had a flaw, it was working within certain structures and sometimes having too much, having a 250-page script that has to be whittled down. This was such a wonderful collaboration between he and Polanski in terms of that Polanski sort of set the tone and the structure of it and told it from the standpoint of Gitta's character. And then he was the one that insisted on that incredibly bleak ending, which Town was initially had a problem with. And later on, he said, yeah, that was the right way to go with this. The other, the other thing that strikes me about the film in terms of its the film noir characteristics, in so many ways, it's a classic film noir, but it also turns the film noir conventions sometimes on their head. Like, you really, for most of the film, you're thinking that Evelyn Mulwray is going to turn out to be your classic femme fatale, and you go down that road, and she brings destruction to the leading character and all those around her. But she's really a victim, and it comes off like that in this. And then there's all of those wonderful references to seeing eyesight, the flaw in the eye, the broken lens of one eye of the bifocals, how she gets shot at the end. And it's that whole idea of, yeah, you think you see reality, but you don't really. You're seeing it askew. So, yeah, I can't wait to hear more comments, because this film really, bring it on.
I agree with you, Bill. We could go on and on and on. And we can go past 8 o'clock. It's okay.
Okay, so we've got Jackie and then John K.
Well, it's hard to top that, right? You guys have all given excellent comments. So there are two tiny, tiny little things I can mention. Obviously, I like the score and all the things that you said. I had not seen this movie before. I was too young to see it when it came out, and never made it on my list. But I heard, I did hear about it though, and I was glad that it was selected as the audience choice. I would say the two things that nobody's mentioned yet, and maybe not. For me, it was like a cross between that movie LA Confidential and Game of Thrones. a little bit of that. But nobody's mentioned two of the things. I think the political part, which you're talking about, the water rights, I think that's relevant. I think that's super relevant for now, and it's going to be super relevant in the future. And instead of having, a person shot in the car running away from Chinatown, it's going to be legal graft and other ways to get the water rights coming. So stay tuned for a sequel for that, because I think that's going to be people killing over that, but or trying to steal that in other ways. And the second thing is a really little thing. I don't know how Darnice and Andy feel about it. Those little surprises that Bill had mentioned and other people had mentioned, but I am always shocked and appalled when someone destroys official records, and he ripped that record out of the logbook and took it with him. And I was, oh my God, I hate you. But that was just one of several little surprises, from her
Jackie, you
tiny
read
little
my mind.
pencil eyebrows to the rest. But you guys have covered all the rest. I think it's a great movie. It's a great movie.
You knew when he asked for that ruler that it was all over.
Yeah,
You knew it.
come on now. I know a lot of people that use a ruler to look at those things, but I definitely knew that was not where he was going.
Oh, that's awful.
It was horrible. Okay, so we got John Kay and then Ethan Jake.
I think I agree with everything everybody said.
And Jeff, sorry.
It's probably been one of the more fascinating conversations that I've attended. It's really been interesting. It's interesting to me how it generates so much thought and really substantive reaction. I saw the movie when it came out, and I actually took my brother, who was 10 years younger, with me. And one of the things that I think the context in which the movie appeared is relevant to this, because I think the movie was in '74 in that period, and I saw it in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., which was not the way it is today. It was kind of a gritty, transitional area. I don't know if anybody remembers it from the 60s and 70s. Yeah, so the mood of the country was really quite unsettled. There was a lot of, it wasn't just political, there was a lot of just uncertainty about what was going to happen, economically, in the middle of a recession. 74 was a year of a recession. There were a lot of things going on that were unsettling. There was a lot of ferment, I would say, and it wasn't all positive. It was a really kind of interesting time. And this movie, to me, kind of crystallized a lot of that. And the other thing I just want to say, I have two more things briefly. To me, it was a very European movie. It wasn't, even though it was set in LA in the 30s, and I thought he captured all that very well, the sensibility just struck me as someone who was watching a lot of European movies at the time, as being very much in that mode. And I mean, even Polanski, he doesn't look like an American in that white suit and hat. He looks like a guy who dropped in from a Godard film or something. It's really kind of an interesting figure. The other thing that I really found interesting, and I appreciated it, I've seen the movie many times, but knowing we were going to have this conversation, I probably paid a little closer attention. Jack Nicholson has these minions, working around him, and they don't really have a lot to do or say. But I think one of them has, for me, the best line in the movie, which is the closing line. "Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown." It's just like he was there to deliver that line, and he delivers it perfectly. And it just sort of brings the whole confusing, ugly mess into real focus. Talking about, I think Bill was mentioning about the eye imagery and the glass imagery. Well, there at that point, I think you get a real clear focus, which is that it's just, almost like a nihilistic mystery at the end. I just want to make one other comment. I think I don't consider it really a noir film myself, but I'm open to that. But didn't Dick Richards come out with Farewell, My Lovely, like the following year or something with Robert Mitchum?
Right, right.
So, you got the feeling that maybe they were trying to push this idea along. I think Farewell, My Lovely is a film noir. With you have Mitchum in there, who was figured in the best film noir as far as I'm concerned out of the past. But I don't think it really. And then of course there was Body Heat a little bit later that kind of built on the same theme. So maybe it is, but it didn't strike me at the time, and I'm still not convinced today that it really is a true film noir. Primarily because there isn't a real femme fatale in the movie. That's the stumbling block for me. But that's all I have to say.
John, a lot of great stuff. Thank you.
Great
We
stuff,
could talk all night about any one of those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent,
Okay.
excellent stuff. Okay, we got a lot of other hands
Yeah,
up
yeah.
too.
So we got Ethan, then then Jeff, then Debbie, and Susan and Sue.
Um,
Put me on my toes today.
I'm actually surprised nobody's really gone into this yet, because like the one big thing that I had heard of with Chinatown before seeing it, besides the final line, is the nostril slitting scene. That was like the one thing that I knew of it. And watching it just now for the very first time, normally when I watch movies from the past, or when a lot of people watch movies from the past, and they have scenes of graphic violence that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is, I don't know how on earth they did that. And then like 40 years later, you watch it, oh, it's obvious. They just did that little thing, a cut right here, a squib right there. It's easy. Watching Chinatown, I had no idea how they did that. I knew that the scene, I knew the scene was there. I knew I was expecting his nostril to get slit, but even when it happened, I was still so shocked because it's indescribable.
Very real, a lot of realism.
Very, very realistic. It was most of the time they do a cut on the action, right. So you can they can fit something in, but this was all in one take. I was very, very impressed, and that really got me to pay attention. Yes, Jake, did you have something to say?
I did. Thank you, Jake. The slapping scene of my daughter, my sister, that had a lot of realism, except her face wasn't red from the slapping. But there were a few other scenes where it would be one of these type of pieces that happens. But yeah, there were a lot of the bits that were very realistic, more so than what you would expect with some of the I won't say technologies, but with the film styles at the time.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. Great points, guys. Both of those. And probably everybody knows that the guy that did the cutting of Nicholson's nose was the director Roman Polanski. The first time I saw that scene too, like Ethan said, I was really disturbed by it. And even watching it now, all these years later, it's still an unsettling scene. And it's so effective, way more effective than any kind of super CGI'd special effects would have been. Great, guys. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, who's next?
Jeff and Debbie. Oh, can't hear you yet. Nope.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay, yeah, I've been having microphone issues. So great comments so far. A couple of things I want to talk about. We talked earlier about the screenplay for this and how it is renowned. And this viewing, I wanted to kind of really pay attention to that and see why that is. And because this screenplay doesn't really call attention to itself the way something like, say, Sweet Smell of Success does, where, there's just so many juicy lines flying around. And the one thing that really struck me this time watching this is the way the exposition is done, how the audience is fed the information that they need. Mm-hmm. Like most movies, even great movies, they resort to what I call exposition chunks, where all of a sudden, whoomp, here's some stuff that you need to know. So we're going to throw that at you. And quite often it doesn't always flow with the rest of the movie. This is just so seamless, the way that you're given the information that you need in Chinatown. And I think part of that is the genius of making the lead character a private eye. So he's on this quest to gain the truth, and basically we get the information as he does, and it's not exposition chunks. It flows into the plot, and it never seems like it's just stuck in there, you know. So and I think that is where the real genius of this screenplay is, because it just doesn't seem like you're being fed information. You're just along for the ride, and you're learning it as Geddes does. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and we haven't really mentioned it yet, but I'm sure we'll get to it, is John Huston as the villain in this. Because when you look at the movie, it's almost an hour in before his name is even mentioned. And he has very little screen time when you really look at it, but he is just so indelible in this as just one of the great villains, you know. And Andy mentioned the line at the beginning, which is the line that he is always remembered for, that most people never have to face the fact that at the right time in the right place, they're capable of anything. But there's two Huston lines in this that I just wanted to concentrate on. One is the one immediately preceding that, where he's talking to Geddes and he says, you know, Evelyn is lost to me now. I've lost Evelyn. And Geddes says, do you blame her for that? And he says, I don't blame myself. And then there's the later line at the end, after all the carnage has happened, where he's trying to get the girl, and he says, she's mine too. Now, those two lines together are 7 words, and they just so encapsulate pure, unmitigated evil, you know. And I think casting Huston in this was absolute genius, because I can't fathom anybody else playing this part. And he's just so oily, and he's a rich old guy, and he's so respectable, but he's just unadulterated evil. And I love that character so much. Like I said, he's not in the movie very much when you look at it, but man, does he leave an impression.
Yeah, Jeff, some great stuff. I mean, you could even say that, you know, with Noah Cross and Huston playing him, you've got the guy that you could make a case for beginning film noir with The Maltese Falcon. And wow, it just really comes full circle here when he's cast as that. I want to go back to something that you mentioned too, and what I really liked about you talking about the detective, and we see things as he sees them. I mean, how many movies have we ever seen, a detective movie, where we are at least 2 steps ahead of the detective all the time, and we know exactly what's going to happen? But that's the great thing about this screenplay, is we are seeing it as Geddes is seeing it, and we're helpless and he's helpless too. And there's so much confusion going on in this. And in some film noir titles, the confusion just gets so ridiculous that it doesn't really matter what's going on. Nobody, even the script writers sometimes don't know what's going on. But this one is so well done. And as he's getting deeper and deeper into this mystery, we are too. And we don't know what's going on, even though it's all laid out in front of us. So great comments, Jeff. Who's next?
Well, actually, I'm going to interject here because I want to play off of something that Jeff said about the pure evilness of Noah, because the line that I wrote down is when they're eating at the club, and he talks about the head being on the fish, and he's like, I hope you don't mind. I think they should always serve it with the head so that one can stare the victim in the eye while the damage is done. If that's not pure evil, given what you find out about him in the rest of the movie, then I don't know what is. That just gave me like the chills, and I did not appreciate that whatsoever. Yeah. Okay. Sudden. Now back to Debbie, and then we'll go to Susan.
Well, I was just going to say, everybody has made great comments that I agree with. The screenplay is just brilliant. I mean, I've read it a couple of times, more than a couple of times, and always check the story beats, and each one works to progress. The story progresses with each one just so, and you learn so much in such subtle ways sometimes, just from the way somebody says something, the way Evelyn acts when Geddes talks about her husband or her father. She gets real nervous, and one minute she's suing him, the next, never mind, I'm not going to sue you, that sort of thing. So it's like there's just so much going on there. But the thing that really struck me this time, because I'm always paying attention to the screenwriting, this time I really paid attention to the look of the film. And the minute it starts, it feels like a film that was made in the 40s. Just the theme, the tone, the look, the writing, the credits, everything about it seemed to make it a film noir, except that it was in color. And then you have all of the stuff like the incest, the degree of underbelly, horrible, terrible stuff happening at high levels. That seemed to push it into neo-noir and make it more modern. And to me, it's like the perfect transition movie between film noir and neo-noir. It's like the beginning of neo-noir, as far as I'm concerned. The first real beginning. But that's just my opinion. And the other thing I was going to say was the line that really gets me every time is when she says, "He owns the cops." Oh, that really just tugs at my heart when she says it like that. It's like, yeah, then you're really screwed.
Right. He owns the water and he owns the cops.
Yeah.
What else do you need?
He owns this town.
What else do you need?
The other thing is, I was going to say something else. Now I can't remember what it was. Darn. Oh, well, I'll think of it.
We can get you back.
Maybe
Yeah.
later.
We'll
Okay.
get you back. Okay,
All right.
Susan, then Sue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. What I remembered this movie when it first came out, and I think I did see it at the time. I'm old enough. And I think one of the things that reviewers talked about at the time was the distraction of that bandage on his nose for so long. It was almost like an affectation, and it bothered me. I thought it was just Jack Nicholson fooling around. It might have been Polanski too, but I don't see why they did that. To me, it spoiled part of the movie for me. It sort of put, I mean, when you talk about all the things like the script and the cinematography and the music and the acting, it was perfect. And then they throw that kind of thing in there. What do the rest of you think about that?
Susan, I have an idea about that. I've thought about that quite a bit too. And it's, I think you could say several things about that. You could say that at that point, Geddes cannot trust his senses. And of course, obviously he can't use his nose. And he also mentions that he likes to have his nose because he can breathe. So it's also hindering him from his sensual, being able to pick up things with his senses, and also breathing. So it's kind of a survival thing, that this is hindering his survival. So that's a couple of things that I've thought about. But other people, let's hear what other people say.
Yeah, well, I just put in the chat too that I also noticed that he lost the bandage after he started to fall for Evelyn. So while that was, something to prevent him from seeing, and then all of a sudden, as they say, his nose got open after that night with Evelyn, and then he no longer needed the bandage. That's how I took it. I don't know how anybody else. But if we don't have too many things, you could put in the chat, because we've got a couple more people that need to talk to.
That's right.
Sue's next.
Well, this is a little bit off, but I was reading a book review in the Washington Post about a story about a guy who it turns out was the model for Gitz, or for Nicholson. That there was actually a real guy who had minions, who knew everybody, who was like a mover and shaker. He was an ex-cop, and he had lots of power in Los Angeles, in the underworld. And his last name is Otash. And there is this book about him just come out. And it just sounded so fascinating. And it made it so real, because there were times when I was thinking, could this really happen? And then I was thinking, but in Los Angeles, I think it could. That you could have, I mean, certainly the water wars and all the skullduggery. And so it was like a real verification of how true it was, that in fact there were a person just like this, that maybe not exactly the same conditions, but in fact was that form of a character, and that was exciting to me. That's
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Yeah, very true. Okay, so now we got John Weber.
All right, there we go. Can you hear
Hi.
me? Okay.
Yeah, how you doing?
I just got a couple things I wanted to toss in here. First, one little fact that I thought was interesting. Robert Towne turned down writing the screenplay for Robert Redford's Great Gatsby to do this movie, and I thought that was kind of good career move. The other thing is that I like in this film, there's a lot of little things that you can watch it and you can pick up new stuff just by what you can watch it 10 times in a row and pick up 10 different things. My personal favorite was when he gets his friend to take him for a ride somewhere, and he's trying to sneak out, and he goes out into the truck, and as he's getting in the truck, he's pulling the door shut very quiet. And then his friend slams the door shut, starts the truck, and it sounds like a 747 starting behind the house. Just the look on his face as he hears the truck. But this one thing that I found, and I was reading a lot of Roger Ebert stuff on this film, and he talks about in there, and that originally there was supposed to be a voiceover on this movie. They made the change because they wanted the audience to feel like they were learning stuff at the exact same time he did, and the voiceover would wreck that illusion. And I've been, ever since I read that, I was like, this could be a whole different movie with a voiceover. It could have wrecked everything. And that was just an observation that I made, and it just stuck in my head. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. I know Bruce put his hand up. We've got Jan next, and then Will.
Just a few comments. What John just said about the voiceover, we can see how that worked in the sequel, The Two Jakes, which really did change the mood of that whole film. What Debbie, I believe, said about the art direction, it is fabulous. And the person who created that spent so much time researching specifically photographs from 1937 Los Angeles. Not 1934, not 1939, 1937, so that she would get it right. About the nose. I'm one of the people who loves the idea about the nose because it subverts the whole idea of the private eye. Also, it reminds us that in this movie, main characters that we care about can be in danger. They can die in this movie. The occasional burst of violence in the movie makes it so much more powerful because it doesn't happen constantly. It comes at certain moments. Tension is wonderful in this movie. And one last comment, Jeff, I think, was talking about John Huston. John Huston is momentous in this movie. There's a critic named Richard T. Jameson, who used to write for Movie Tone News. You can find his review online now, Richard T. Jameson in Chinatown. He's got a marvelous description of John Huston's voice. It is molasses mixed with marmalade. And he has this folksy tone beneath the utter evil of someone who literally has no limitations. He has no limits. He will do anything to achieve what he wants.
Nicely said, Jan.
Very good.
Okay, so we've got Will McKinley.
Hey everybody. So as I think Andy can attest, I spend most of my time watching older movies rather than current. So, when I was not old enough to see this when it came out, I have seen it before, but revisiting this week, I was struck by how it, as Debbie said, I think Debbie said, it's very much in the style and tone of classic noir, but informed by the era in which it was made. However, a lot of things are homage or are an homage to a classic style, and they kind of conk out after that, right? But Chinatown basically takes the classic noir format and gives us only what we could see in the 70s. So it's fascinating to me because it does two things. Now so as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, oh, how would they do this if it was, early 50s rather than early 70s? Who would be playing these roles? What would they not tell us? What would they not show us? But at the same time, I think about what are we seeing in the 70s that we wouldn't have seen back in the 40s or early 50s, and does it make it better? For me, I was struck, somebody mentioned that the sort of the twistiness of the plot. I was struck by similarities to The Big Sleep. I don't know if anybody else felt that. There's the sort of quirky, dysfunctional family and twisty plot with all sorts of, odd supporting characters. And I'd be curious also to hear from Andy and Darnice and anybody else who you would have cast if this had been made in the classic film noir era, because I have two very clear ideas, but I'm interested to hear what everybody else says. Thank you.
Yeah, Will, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for those comments. Wow, I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. I go to Bogart or Mitchum first for something like that. But as you mentioned, The Big Sleep is very similar to this film, or this film is very similar to The Big Sleep in so many ways, and some of that is the convoluted nature of both stories. That's a tough one. I think Bogart's my first guy, but I don't think we ever saw Bogart in the same way that we see J.J. Geddes at the end of this film.
I would agree. I almost feel like Bogart is a little. Nicholson played him with such sensitivity and such sadness that I know Bogart could pull that off, but that wasn't his realm. So I would have to think about that too. Okay, so while we think about this, let's go to Bruce. He's got his hand up. Remember?
Sorry, I figured out how to lower my hand. Building off of what John said earlier about how there used to be a voiceover, but it was removed so the audience could more experience the story through Jake's eyes. We would figure stuff out as he was figuring it out, right? I think that's a sufficient. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed while I was watching it was that certainly extended to the cinematography and the camera angles and the way that they shot it, not just with pretty locations and cool colors or whatever, but from what I can tell, the majority of the movie is shot in a wide angle, which is, makes you feel uneasy, makes you feel close. But there were a lot of very, very large number of shots, I noticed, very an unusual amount that were shot over the shoulder, but the character who you see the back of their head, if my wonderful father will, yes, this character that you see in the over the shoulder,
yeah,
it always seemed to be half of their head was off by the frame. Sometimes there were very, very few times where the whole head was actually in the frame. It was bisected, and I think that's because over the shoulder shots are great to see through the eyes of a character, which is obviously what we want to do with Jake. But I wonder if that we only see half of the character. Maybe that somehow extends to you only see half of what's really going on in Chinatown. If that makes any sense.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Jake?
I feel so used, but I do take.
Interesting. Hold on a second. I'm trying to see. Do we have somebody else? Oh, Chuck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Ethan brings up a good point, and this is how I think about the noir detectives. You think of the classic era, like Hammett, Sam Spade, or Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe. You think about J.J. Geddes. He has some similarities to them, but he also has some differences in the fact that he doesn't see the whole picture. He's in over his head, and he doesn't solve the crimes. successfully like some of these other classic era noir detectives is. So I think that's an excellent observation about the cinematography there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he does kind of solve the crime, but he doesn't solve the crime. Like he solves the motive,
Right.
right? I think that's the thing. Like he's got the whole backstory. He just can't put the pieces together. One thing I wasn't sure about, and maybe somebody could talk about this, is so we kind of know that he was on the force previously, right? That's kind of what we get the feeling that he did work with some of these cops before. But I'm kind of wondering between the two, was he a good guy that couldn't put up with the corruption and then started doing his own corruption, or was he a guy that got pulled into the corruption and decided he wanted out? Those are the two things.
I just asked Ethan the exact same question. Why did he quit the force? And I decided that's a great prequel idea.
I'm sort of torn between either Lil Gitz or
Lil Gitz.
Young Jake.
No, it'll just be like Chinatown the movie, because I don't know. Like I think I'll get to you in a minute, Bill. But this is one of the things that I have a problem with in films when I don't know the reason why it's called what it's called. So the first time I saw this film, I kept wanting there to be more action in Chinatown, and it wound up being 5 minutes worth. And it's sort of like, why not just call Citizen Kane Rosebud? Like it's one of those things. Like you're waiting for the entire time to get to why it's called that, and then at the end you realize, okay, so Chinatown, like someone said earlier, it's just a concept. It's just an idea. It's not really the actual place and what it meant at that time. But it's like, yeah, come on. just forget it. It's Chinatown. You're right. Okay.
Exactly.
Bill Bates.
Bill, yeah.
That's a fascinating question, because we don't ever really know exactly what it was that Gittes encountered in his when he was a district attorney in Chinatown, and we know that he hurt. His actions led to somebody being either hurt or killed, a woman, and you do get the feeling this is a very complicated, flawed character. There's a lot of things about him that are coarse and even maybe slightly bigoted or whatever. But at the same time, he is thematically, he's a do-gooder. He wants to help people. Early on with the very first character in the movie, he's going easy on both his psyche and also his pocketbook. He says, hey, look, I'm not going to take everything from you. And he was constantly, and as it's been pointed out, I mean, the screenplay is so amazing because just little throwaway lines, they always, there's nothing superfluous. It always moves the plot. So he'll make these little comments about the corruption in the force. And they allude to the fact that he got out of Chinatown because he hated the corruption. And he thought, maybe I can do something to help people if I go out there and do it on my own. But we get back into that, the flawed nature of the character and the fact that as good as he was at tactics, I mean, like, he was obviously a really bright, good detective. All the little things he did, like putting the watch under the tire to see what time it was when the tire ran over it. He did all these little things that were like, oh, that's so clever. And he was obviously a really clever guy. And yet, and he did essentially solve the mystery, but he also had problems seeing the entire picture, as almost all of the characters in this thing did. It was that, and which harkens back to the reference of Chinatown, which is you think you're seeing what you're seeing, but you're not really seeing what you're seeing. So I do feel like his character was striving to be a good person with this hard-boiled veneer, and that he was thinking he was finding himself and helping people. And then we get to that one of the reasons that the ending is so bleak. It's not only the fact that it ends with this terrible, gruesome killing, but his life is kind of shattered. And I think his whole reason d'etre, his whole reason for being, is in question now. And I think they address that later in the Two Jakes. I give kudos to the Two Jakes for their their moniker there. I think it just lends to the richness of the character. It's not all clear cut and black and white, but my general feeling is that here was a guy who was trying to do good, and it was almost like fate was always loaded up to never let that happen.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, so I'm gonna go with Gary, then Jan, then the Jakes.
And I think Bob has something as well too.
Oh, Bob, I'm sorry. Yes, Bob. I missed you, Bob. Go ahead. Oh, let's go Bob first, because you guys have jumped in. We'll let Bob hasn't spoke yet. So go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, I couldn't. About the watches. He used two in case the car rolled forward or backward when it left the scene. Yeah. I thought that was the key to the whole movie. I'm just kidding.
That was brilliant. Okay. There you go. Gary, Jen, and then Jake.
So one of the things that was interesting for me watching the movie is, and of course this, is the product of watching it now in 2021, is we have Nicholson's entire career. And that includes the period of time where I think in some ways he got lazy and his acting became a caricature of himself. And we all sort of like, oh, here's Jack Nicholson and he's going to play the Jack Nicholson character and he's going to do the Jack Nicholson shtick. And yet in this movie, he wasn't. He wasn't the most evil guy on the screen. He did have that do-gooder part to his character. And I'll be honest, there were times that I had a hard time needing to remind myself he's not the Jack Nicholson caricature that I think he later became sort of in the final last years of his career. So it was interesting to go back and see something from, if not the beginning, darn close to the beginning. So just an observation I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Gary, thank you so much. I was when you were saying that, I was trying to think of another Nicholson performance that is like this in any way, where he's not doing Jack Nicholson. And the only one I could come up with off the top of my head was The Pledge, which is a great Nicholson performance where he is also very frustrated, trying to do the right thing. And it's also a haunting performance like this one. But thank you, Gary. Great stuff. Darlene, who's next? Jan.
I remember when I saw this for the first time, I got such a charge out of the confrontation scene between Geddes and Cross once Geddes discovers the bifocals in the backyard pond. Geddes needs that confrontation. He solved the crime. He wants to have it out with the villain, and he wants him to know that he has discovered his secret. But he's so cynical that he's naive in a way, because it seems to never occur to Jake that someone like Cross would bring someone with him to a gunfight. And then at the end of the film, you discover that Jake has accidentally set everything into motion to cause the destruction of a woman that he's grown to love. And if he had handled it in a different way, she and her daughter and sister could have gotten away safely to Mexico. So like someone just said, and this has been such a great commentary from everybody, I can't remember who it was, but Jake is utterly shattered at the end. He's done the right thing. He has redeemed himself. He's discovered the truth, but it's not set him free. And I remember for years and years, I wondered, would Jake ever care enough to try again? Would he ever involve himself on this level again? And that's why I was waiting so long for the two Jakes to come out. I wanted to know the answer to that.
Okay. Go ahead, Ethan and Bruce.
Going back to what Bill said, I think it goes back to that. I don't know, it's not really an underlying theme. It is a very strong theme of futility. Jake knows what happened. And he even confronts Noah and says, which again, name for someone involved with water and as Darnie said, close family members.
Sorry.
but that he naively goes and says, I know what you did. And he even goes to Noah and says, why? You have enough money. Why could you possibly want to do this? And so there's a little bit of naivety there, but there's also a lot of just sort of world weariness with the corruption and with what's going on. But it goes back to that futility, and it sort of slaps us in the face that just because towards the end, when Jake knew the who and the why, and even the how of the murder, that knowledge isn't power in this case. He still can't fight this. He still can't make this better. It's obvious at the end that the bad guy is going to win, and now it's even more obvious because the one person who could possibly help him bring down the corruption just got shot in her eye with the one little black dot in it. that just, it really takes that futility.
Foreshadowing.
But I do have a question that we can address, I hope, at some point. Lieutenant Escobar, at the end, at first I thought he just had some sort of a history with Jake that had some sort of animosity or some sort of friction between them. At the end, when he says, go home, I'm doing you a favor, this is for your own good, is Escobar crooked? Is he on the take?
Great question.
That is a great question.
What do you guys think?
Dan says no.
No.
I
no,
don't agree either. Go ahead, Dan.
That was in the script. They
Yeah.
said, Noah Cross asked Geddes, is he crooked? He goes, as far as money corrupts anybody in capitalism, but I know him to be a good cop and he does the right thing.
But there could be that could have opened up the way to say,
but
oh,
money
good,
corrupts.
let me try to get that guy.
Right.
If
Well,
he's
the
that
whole
guy.
money corrupts because LA is crooked because they're diverting the water. So you're coming back to the original theme.
Yeah, for the futility of
if
it.
Noah Cross is corrupt, it's hard to beat that. He knew they were diverting the water. He was bringing LA to the water.
Yeah, but if he was looking,
but he wants to know if he can buy Louis
Right.
Escobar. I think that's what Noah Cross is asking Geddes right there. But I think Geddes is a great shooter.
That's Alan Alda.
My impression is that he was
You
involved.
have to trust your storyteller at some point, or you're losing faith as a spectator.
Okay, let's hear some other thoughts. Who else has some thoughts about Escobar?
Bill, go ahead, Billis.
Well, before I mention that, I just want to go back to what Jan just said a moment ago. So the way the whole thing, as he pointed out, because of what Jake did, everything came to a head at the end, and she got shot. Well, he alluded to the fact that when he had been a policeman or whatever in Chinatown, that he had tried to protect some woman and because of what he did, she got severely punished. So it's almost like history repeated itself, very much so. But as far as, obviously those two guys had history together as cops, but I really felt at the end that he was working for Noah, that the policeman was. I really thought he had become corrupt and he just let Jake go because of their history together. Otherwise, he was going to take him down too. But the way things ended with the fantastic pistol shot at that woman from so far away and hits her. But the way that happened, I think he finally said, I'll just let Jake go. And one other thing I wanted to say, of all the movies we've watched lately, I love this one the most. And it wasn't just because there was no subtitles that I had to watch. That certainly had a factor.
Good.
Good plug there.
All right. Let's see. Who else do we have, Barney's? like I said, we can
So we
keep this
got,
going
I
for a
just
while.
want to say, we can. I wanted to talk about, Susan just wanted to know if the water thing was then just a MacGuffin. But I don't believe so. I think it just illustrates the destruction. Yeah, Debbie says it too. Just kind of demonstrate the destruction.
Yeah, I think the water thing is essential, and I think I was putting in the chat that the water thing is so easy to miss the first time you see it because you think it's either a diversion or something else, but it's really crucial, and you could legitimately say that's the biggest crime that happens in the entire film. So yes, it is. I think it's essential. But let's hear
I
from
don't
others.
know. Those Florsheim shoes were expensive back then. I think that was the crime that they both lost the shoe. I don't know. Okay, we got Dan and Gary, then Bill.
Well, when I think about Escobar, I think about the fact that he is a Hispanic American cop in Los Angeles in a totally predominantly white police force. So that says something about his perseverance to rise up to lieutenant, and probably also his willingness to look the other way when he had to get where he is. And I do believe his old friendship with Geddes is what allowed him to let Geddes leave at the very, very end. In the original screenplay, Escobar had a relationship with Evelyn Mulray, which Polanski finally cut out, and I think it was for the best because he streamlined everything down to the essence. It's a 130-minute movie, and I swear there's not a wasted minute in the entire movie.
Absolutely.
I so agree with product placement, definitely. Go ahead, Gary, and then Bill, and then Jeff.
So picking up on going back to the theme about the water and the corruption of the water and how essential that was, one of the moments I loved in the movie is when Jack Nicholson discovers in that first time that he visits the office that Mulray once owned the water supply. And he can't wrap his head around the concept of a person owning the water. And I mean, I love that because there is something so sort of, illogical about the notion that, an individual can own a city's water supply. But it also speaks to sort of because that is so ingrained in the society to think that one person could own it and profit off it. And then it also is a hint to what we see later of his continued inability to sort of see the full picture. We get that first hint of it with, he used to own the water supply, and he just like, owned it? How do you own the water supply? So I just loved that moment.
Yeah,
I love that moment too. Thank you, Gary. And we really haven't said much about Hollis Mulray. I mean, you could make the case that he's really the only character that has a real moral compass in this film. He's trying to do the right thing. He says in the beginning, no, I'm not going to build another dam because the last time 500 people died. And of course he gets killed early in the film, and that moral compass is pretty much gone. You could make the case that Geddes has a moral compass as well, although he skirts some morality here and there. But I think it's Mulray is the character I think that gets the short shift here, but I think he's a fascinating character.
I think so too. Yeah. Bill, then Jeff.
Yeah, Andy, I totally agree with that. And in addressing that question of Susan about the water, I agree with where you were coming from on that as well, which is I think that the whole plot of the water and stealing the water, et cetera, and the bigness of that political thing was really quintessential to the movie as a whole. It was almost like the water part of it was macro to the micro of the familial corruption and the incest, et cetera, et cetera. There were so many striking parallels from one to the other, one being a small story and the other being a big story that affects everybody. And it also it felt to me like it gave the overall piece a real feeling of substance. The water wars were something that really happened in early 20th century California. And I was reading that they largely based some of the characterization on a real guy named William Mulholland, who may have actually been who they named Mulholland Drive after, which is another great film that I'd love to get into sometime. But if you think about it, Hollis Mulwray, Mulholland, that's where they got the Hall and the Mole for Hollis Mulwray was from William Mulholland. So I think that Town in particular, but both Town and Polanski realized that this overarching theme of this water scandal in California was such a perfect metaphor for what was going on in the underlying crime drama and all the corruption and incest that was going on.
Yeah, very good, Bill. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
I just want to jump way back in the conversation here. I think Susan had mentioned, had talked about Nicholson with his bandage. And I didn't mention when I spoke earlier, but Jack Nicholson is my favorite actor by 10 miles. Like nobody else is even close. And this movie is right in his wheelhouse. And I actually like that bandage because to me, it just points out that this guy was so without ego about doing this part that you can stick this ugly piece of tape on my face for half the running time of the movie. I'm okay with that because it moves it along. Some stars probably would have balked at that. Say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to look that ugly for this much of the movie. But I actually appreciate that he went ahead with that story point and did it. And just to your point, Andy, about the Nicholson persona as it became to be known later, you look at his 70s resume, it's amazing. You know, the one that I was going to point out that is kind of atypical of that is King of Marvin Gardens, which is kind of not his best work, but you've got stuff like The Last Detail, The Shining, Five Easy Pieces, The Passenger, like they're all amazing. And if anybody hasn't seen any of those, I would recommend you check them out.
Yeah.
I just put in the chat, I love The King of Marvin Gardens, and it's a criminally underseen film that is kind of hard to find. I'm not sure if we have it in the library, but Nicholson and Bruce Dern, Ellen Burstyn in that film, tremendous film.
Is it based in Atlantic City?
Yes.
Okay, that's my only connection. Why are we seeing your phone? Oh, I thought you were trying to show us something here, Josie. No, that's fine. Okay, so no one else had their hand raised. Did I miss anyone? No. Okay.
Okay. Well, since nobody has their hand raised, a couple of things that we didn't really get to. We didn't really say that much about. We did mention the Jerry Goldsmith score. And some of you may know that this was not the original score. In fact, Jerry Goldsmith didn't get involved until very close to the end of the project. The film was made and it was scored. I can't remember the composer's name, but I can look it up. It was a very avant-garde score that Roman Polanski wanted to have in the film. And he played it for test audiences. We played it for other people in the industry, and nobody liked the score at all. So Jerry Goldsmith was contacted very late in the project. He wrote the score in 11 days, and it's an iconic score. And Goldsmith was a master, but you think about this, that he did this in 11 days, and it's absolutely perfect. I can't imagine this film with any other score. If you want to hear what the original score was like, you can find trailers online that have the original score in it. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well.
Yeah, Jan put in the chat that Philip Lambro was the composer. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you.
Okay, so this could be a whole nother hour-long conversation about the Polanski influence in this film, but I guess I'd seen this many years ago, didn't like it, rewatched it from our great movies lens and looked at a lot of things. And, you know, over the course of these conversations, I've learned a lot about looking into the cinematography and the lighting, and I really came to appreciate it. But I didn't appreciate the fact that the ending of the story was changed by Polanski from the father dying to the father not only getting away with his crime, but getting away with his daughter, who, product of his abuse and rape, and also now maybe subject to whatever else power he is. So that truly disturbed me. Also, you know, given the fact of Pulaski's background, but I wonder if, you know, what people think about. I know you're like, oh, it's a great ending, it's great, but that one piece of it is probably what I'll take away from the ending of this movie more than anything else. I just wonder if anybody else had some comments about that. John?
There's John. Yeah.
This doesn't directly answer your question, but it's relevant. I told my brother, the one I told you that was 10 years younger, that we saw the movie in Georgetown, that about this event, and that I was rewatching Chinatown in preparation for it, and I asked him if he remembered it, and he did, and I remember how we enjoyed it at the time, but he wants nothing to do with that movie or anything from Polanski, nothing. He's just, I mean, he's not some kind of, you know, rock rib Calvinist Puritan. He's just but he is so turned off by that. And I have to say that Noah Cross, his behavior and his justification almost sounds like a rationalization for what Polanski did. I don't know if anybody's ever read the court documents around that. It was horrible what he did to that young girl. Horrible. I couldn't even imagine where he got the ideas to do some of the stuff that he did, but it was horrible. So I don't know. It doesn't really affect, I have to say, my appreciation of the movie, but it's certainly a stumbling block. And in the case of my brother, he just will not even, you know, he doesn't want to look at Chinatown, doesn't look at anything by Roman Polanski. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting reaction to that event.
Yeah, John.
Around the same time, and I think it was at Jack Nicholson's house that it happened.
It was, right.
Yeah. John, that's a great point. And, you know, you can say that Polanski is playing that out right now because he did get away with it. I mean, he will never set foot in the United States again because as soon as he does, he's going to be arrested. So, you know, in that manner of speaking, he did get away with it, just like Noah Cross did. So I understand exactly why your brother feels the way he does. And we've had this discussion many times on the Great Movies about directors, actors, people in the business that do reprehensible things, yet make great art. And that's a decision that we all have to make. You know, you know, it goes around. You don't hate the work, you hate the jerk. And there's something to that, but that's a tough one because we all have to make that decision for ourselves. But thank you, John. That was great.
I'm reading about Leni Riefenstahl now, and that's another example.
Yeah.
A great artist who is severely morally compromised. But you know, you can't deny the greatness of at least two of her films.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Good point. Okay, so it wasn't just me.
Okay. Is that Sue, or is that Sue just adjusting your? Okay.
Think.
All right.
Are you saying yes? Okay.
All
yeah,
right.
there's so many people out there, Susan, Woody Allen. I mean, there's so many, even authors. You know, it's a tricky thing to separate the art from the person on many levels, right?
Yeah, and you don't want to feel like you want to support the work, but you don't want to support the person, you know, and that's always a tough call. But yeah, there's a lot of great art made by absolutely reprehensible people. So again, it's an individual thing, and it's not easy. It's not easy.
Will's got your hand up.
I do, and I wanted to just appreciate you, Darnice, for mentioning that, because one of the things we do, like classic film people do, is we sort of like make our peace every day with a lot of flaws, you know, in the you know, on the part of the people that made the films, on the part of the, you know, the stories that are told and the perspectives that are presented. And I think we're so some of us, me included, are so accustomed to like making that peace, right, on a regular basis, that, you know, we can totally miss a point like you just made. Like that I should have been watching this through exactly the prism that you mentioned, but I wasn't. And so, and you know, there's something, even though that I wasn't watching it through that prism, there's something that always sort of, you know, doesn't sit right with me, you know? And it's like, I can't put my finger on it. And then you just did it. You just did it. So, you know,
that's what I do.
Anyway, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Yeah, it's been going on for a long time. It's not that, I mean, it sort of goes back to the whole idea of cross and just power, right? And it's just how much can I get away with, and how much can I pay off people with, and how much can I intimidate? And so that's just, you know, that's just the nature of men. No, I'm not going to say that. That's just the nature of
you can say
power.
that.
No, I mean, no. There's a number
we
of women in those positions that have done the same thing. We just don't hear about them as much as we do men. But it's definitely human nature. Yeah, it's just a fact of life. Great power corrupts greatly. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. With great power comes great responsibility. You know, all of that stuff.
All of that, right? All right. Well, we are getting a bit past our normal time, but that's great because the conversation has been fantastic. And we always, at the end of these discussions, talk about recommendations. And I'll give some recommendations. And if you have some recommendations, we would love to hear that too. So my first recommendation is not even a movie. And some of you are already aware of this book, but this book that just, well, actually it's been out maybe about a year, called The Big Goodbye by Sam Wasson. And this does talk about the making of Chinatown and much, much more. And, you know, one man we have not even mentioned is the producer, Robert Evans, whose story in and of itself is absolutely fascinating. This book is in the library system in Anne Arundel County, but if you are a fan of Chinatown, you are definitely going to want to read this book and probably own it. It's absolutely fascinating. So I recommend that. It's tough recommending films that are like Chinatown because there's really no other film exactly like it. But I have a couple that I think one of them at least comes fairly close. And the first one has already been mentioned is LA Confidential from 1997, which is a period neo-noir or flat out film noir set in 1953 Los Angeles, stars Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce as cops investigating a series of murders. But the film is primarily about police corruption, which is a theme that was explored in many, many film noir movies from the 1950s. The film has a great period feel, and although Crowe and Pearce were largely unknowns at the time, the film also stars Kevin Spacey, Kim Basinger, and Danny DeVito. Now, this film is not on Canopy, but you can probably stream it in some other locations. It is on DVD from the library. And another film that really doesn't get talked about that much, it's a little bit related to Chinatown, and that is Blood Simple from 1984. The very first film from the Coen brothers, who I'm a big fan of the Coen brothers. It's about a private detective who's hired by a man to murder his unfaithful wife, but the detective has other plans. This was also one of the first films to star actress Frances McDormand, and it has a great, great performance from Emmett Walsh, who is one of my favorite character actors of all time. This one is also on DVD from the library, and if you have never explored the Coen brothers before, there's no better place to start than with their first film, Blood Simple. So do any of you have any recommendations? Oh, we got a ton of
we got a whole bunch of them. So I can I'll try to go nowhere. Jeff and
Yeah, I was going to stump for one from the same era. It's Arthur Penn's Night Moves with Gene Hackman, another private eye who's kind of on a track of something, but isn't really sure where he's going with it or where it's going to end. And just the absolute perfect, bleak noir final shot in that movie. It's pitch perfect. And if you watch the movie, if you've seen the movie, you know the one I'm talking about. If you haven't, it absolutely one of the great closing shots in film history.
I'm glad you mentioned it, Jeff, because I can't mention it because since the library doesn't own Night Moves, I can't talk about it. So I'm glad you did.
Lost some hands there. Just, put him chat. I got Susan's hands sticking out the corner. And Ethan. Susan, go ahead.
I wrote that in the chat, but a movie that popped up when we were all talking about Chinatown that sort of reminded me of Chinatown a little bit was Hollywoodland. And a lot of people didn't see it, but I kind of have this strange fascination with that movie about George Reeves and his murder or suicide or whatever. And Adrian Brody played sort of a sad sack detective. And it sort of had the same kind of tone as Chinatown, I thought.
Yeah, good pick. Excellent. All right, we had a lot of people here.
So Ethan and Debbie.
I don't have a recommendation. I just have a question that I've been meaning to have answered. Who was the person that suggested we watch Chinatown tonight? Because it's an audience choice, right?
Actually, it's not an audience choice. It is an Andy choice that I shoehorned in there.
So. Well, Andy, good choice.
Thank you.
So I thought we had 3 audience choices: Quill, Lady Bird, and what was the last one?
Yeah, we did one in the 1st of June called After the Storm.
After the Storm was an audience choice?
Yeah.
Right, I remember that now.
Yeah. No, good questions. Yeah.
Night Moves is on Canopy. Yeah.
Oh, is Night Moves on Canopy?
Cool.
Everybody go watch Night Moves as soon as we finish here.
I don't know, it's a long night.
And I'm only halfway kidding, It is great.
Audience choice, there we go.
Yeah, maybe the next audience choice.
Okay, so we got Debbie.
I was just going to suggest Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which has a lot of Chandler references and a twisty plot and corruption and dysfunctional family stuff. Really good.
I have not seen that one, but I'm glad you mentioned
it. Excellent. It's really good. Well worth it.
We had a couple of people put in the chat, The Long Goodbye, by Bobby Altman too. So that's definitely one. And I know a couple had mentioned, I think Bill mentioned Mulholland Drive. And Body Heat.
Body Heat, yeah. All good choices. Really, really good choices.
Great.
Yeah. All right. Other recommendations?
Did Bob say goodbye?
Bob was.
Jan.
Okay, Jan
and Will.
And Will.
Cutter's Way. Cutter's Way has a performance by John Hurd that is for the ages. He's an embittered Vietnam vet who is one of the funniest characters you're going to meet, one of the most profane, one of the most dangerous, and one of the most pitiful characters because he's absolutely determined to bring someone down who he says has committed crime. May or may not be true, but watch this for John Hurd alone. It is a wonderful movie.
If you only know John Hurd from Home Alone, you've got to see Cutter's Away. This guy is probably, Jan would probably agree, one of the actors, one of the greatest actors who has been completely ignored. And sadly, he passed away a few years ago. We showed Cutter's Way at the library a few years ago in person, and so many people just did not know how to deal with that ending. Watch Night Moves and then immediately go watch Cutter's Way. But you probably want to put a comedy in there somewhere because they're kind of like Chinatown in the way they're bleak. I think was Will next?
Yep, Will.
Okay. So in addition to the Big Sleep that I mentioned earlier, I did not get a chance to share who I would be casting if this was made in 1947 instead of 74, and that would be Robert Montgomery. And Evelyn Keyes. Robert Montgomery, so Nicholson has, you know, you always believe Bogart and you always believe Mitchum and as, you know, sort of genuine toughs with the stuff behind it. Nicholson has a little bit of a sort of like kind of smart weasel, you know, persona in this. And there were line deliveries throughout this movie that reminded me of Robert Montgomery, who, if you folks don't know him, he's, you know, in a movie called Lady in the Lake is a good example. He's also the father of Elizabeth Montgomery, Bewitched star. And for Evelyn Keyes, now, Faye Dunaway is definitely icier and cooler than the typical like Evelyn Keyes movie, but Evelyn Keyes often plays a sort of damaged beneath the surface woman. And one I would call out is a movie called The Prowler, which is an excellent noir that, you know, I know Andy agrees with me. I would definitely seek that out, you know. So those are three: Big Sleep, Lady in the Lake, Prowler.
Excellent. Will, I love that choice of Robert Montgomery. I didn't even think about him, but I was thinking through Ride the Pink Horse. He has some of those same
that's another good
mannerisms
example
in that film. That's, oh man, and Evelyn Keyes is, yeah, she would be perfect for that.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Let's see, I think I saw John's hand up. Was that right?
John
M?
John M? No, I don't think so. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah, I was agreeing with you about Robert Montgomery. I mean, usually, I mean, he was in Mr. and Mrs. Smith with you know, the Hitchcock movie. He can do comedy too.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and you know, In Harm's Way, which was a you know, just a World War II film. But yeah, he was kind of like an everyman, and I think that, you know, if you think about Nicholson a little bit, just on their features and mannerisms, he was one of the first people I thought of. I actually just looked up some of his films right here because I remember him so well in some of those, and he would fit perfectly in you know, a movie just like that.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Thanks, John.
And Bill, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, even though they're and I did mention one of them earlier, but two that I'm reminded of, which are sort of the relay the themes of things not being really what you think they are, and sort of that kind of seamy underbelly of Southern California, right? Is One Mulholland Drive, which you could argue is a film noir with a lot of changes and embellishments, but it's really about dreamscapes. It's and I wouldn't lightly recommend it because it's a very difficult movie. It demands more than a couple of watchings to really understand what's going on there, but it's a brilliant film. And the other is Memento, which strikes me in a very similar way.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, I think we got Bruce, and see if there's anybody else. Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to clarify. There have been a bunch of recommendations for Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive is a 2001 film by David Lynch. So you have to know what you're getting with that one. I think people might actually mean the 1996 Lee Tamahori film Mulholland Falls. That's the one that's a little closer to the noir. Definitely not David Lynch.
Well, I would agree. Mulholland Drive is called film noir by some people, and I would agree. It's not. It's not really film noir. It's got some trappings, but it's really all about dreamscapes. It's a very psychologically complex film, and I totally agree with you as well that David Lynch is not for sissies. It's
it is.
You really got to know what you're getting.
Film. It's a great film, but I don't know if we can discuss it in
if you're thinking about the LA underbelly,
right?
And that
Right, and that's where I think
Mulholland Drive.
Mulholland Falls. I mean, Mulholland Drive is a great film, but it's not really in the same conversation, I don't think, as Mulholland Falls.
True.
But
No, I think Debbie brought up the best
but watch 'em
movie
both.
that was in there, and that was Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. I think that's the perfect movie to end this to end this
That's right.
comparison to.
All right, so we've all got lots of stuff to watch, and you know, I feel like watching Chinatown again as soon as we finish this. I mean, the discussion was so wonderful. So I thank everybody for joining me tonight. First time people, I hope you will join us again. Sign up for the email. Be glad to keep you posted on what's going on. Yeah, so again, next week we're going to talk about Quill, The Life of a Guide Dog, which is on Canopy. So I hope I'll see you next Friday. In the meantime, everybody stay safe and watch some great movies. And thanks again.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, everyone.